60%. So they must benefit more from the resources that are being extracted in their areas. And the comparison that I would make in this particular case is some of these communities have not benefited from other natural resources such as miraa, such as tea. Yeah? These communities are annually, year in, year out, given loans, given grants, given things that will help them utilize and exploit that particular natural resource more than other communities. So when a community is next to an oil field, or is next to a gemstone mine, or is next to titanium, why should they not benefit more than the other communities? Like I said, it's a controversial view up for conversation, but yeah.
The Baraza, it is okay.
From a county perspective, we have a huge role to play on two levels. The first level is that we are the ones that are closest to the community, to the grassroots man. We are the ones who are every single day listening to the cries and needs and general requirements of the local Mwananchi. We know what it is that they require from a development perspective. We're the ones who understand how we need to be spreading and distributing the resources that are available from national government and any other investment opportunities available. We are also the ones who administer, in some cases, the land that is required for the extraction of the minerals. Therefore, we have a huge role to play in being able to coordinate these activities. On the fiscal perspective, we're the ones who are defining the priorities as following consultations with the communities. So we're the ones who are defining the developmental priorities. So I think our role is extremely crucial and key in being able to have this benefit sharing conversation in the country. And when it comes to absorptive capacity, that would fall back to what Charles mentioned earlier. It's a governance perspective. It's a governance conversation. How are we planning as county governments to be able to, one, create development agendas in different sectors within our counties, but two, how are we allocating our funds? We at the moment are currently engaging in our county integrated development plan, the second version from the first one that was done from 2013 to 2017 that expires in June 2018. But for the second CIDP, we are holding public participation forums for the community to let us know what are your priorities, for them to let us know what their priorities are, and for us to define how we will then allocate our budgets for those developmental agendas. Now, if we had a significant extractive project in the county, and I'll give an example of Wanjala mining where iron ore was being mined, but it's currently being suspended. If that was something that was currently operational, it would mean that we have a lot more leeway to discuss what are our issues when it comes to infrastructure and how can the extractive sector, for example, assist in some of these things in either an agreement in the community development agreement or within the CSR budgets. Bearing in mind that our own county budget is quite limited. We have 3.8 billion as an allocation from the national exchequer. So I think the absorptive capacity generally falls around governance and the leadership that is in office in being able to manage the priorities and the budgetary structuring on a long-term basis, the 5 years, as well as the annual basis through the annual budgets and the county fiscal strategies that are developed annually. I think the other thing that we've not really touched on is while you're looking at benefits from a fiscal perspective, i.e. the royalties, what other benefits can be gained from the artisanal small-scale mining, particularly when it comes to construction minerals? So as a country, we have quite a number of development projects coming up that require inputs from the extractive sector. What are the benefits that are accruing to the communities around those areas where the development projects are being carried out? So SGR, the expansion of roads, the construction of mega projects from the private sector. How what are the benefits accruing from the sand, from the construction stones, from even the water that is being utilized? How do we start defining that, and how do we also look at who has the regulatory ownership of managing these minerals? At the moment, we have quite huge ambiguities. Previously, the former defunct county councils managed common minerals or construction minerals. Mining Act 2016 defines ballast sand as a mineral, meaning that this is now the under the mandate of the Ministry of Mining. But do they have the capacity to be able to regulate it on a local basis to ensure that whatever financial benefits need to be accrued are actually captured? So those are the type of conversations that I think we need to start having, aside from how many millions should we be getting from base.
I think that's great, because what's emerging here is almost an acceptance that as long as you're in an oil and gas or mining region, you deserve a certain compensation, for lack of a better word, or certain benefits need to come to you. But what you've touched on is much more for me, and now we're going on a whole different perspective nationally. Just the concept of a natural resource. Why is it that when it comes to oil, gas and mining, we're talking about more of a geographical leaning, or are we going on needs scale? I'm struggling as to why we are prioritizing oil, gas and mining and not the other sectors or any other revenues. Exactly what she's mentioned. For instance, she's bringing in an argument that, let's take SGR and the ballast and the stones, the Madeira stones, whatever it may be. Why are we not talking about what benefits that those communities can get from this particular aspects? We're just talking about oil, gas and mining. When it comes to water, why are we not talking about if the certain county has got water and it's supplying all the other counties, why can't we say that 5% of all the revenues from that water stay at? There's a distinction here when we're talking about natural resources that we need, I think, a much more concerted effort, especially regulatory effort, because these things are just bubbling at the surface, and it's going to come up. Now, I'd like to move on to purity. We've gotten a question here. Actually, several people have asked us on social media, whose benefits is a question that keeps on coming. Which benefits? And definition of community. That keeps on coming all the time. We've gotten about 3 or 4 people who want to know, because they're saying benefit sharing is a gray area. In your perspective, and it's something someone touched on a little bit, talking about how the Mining Act, as it currently states, it's a bit what they're being asked to do on the several aspects of benefit sharing can either go large or go really small. But I wonder from your perspective, whether you might answer that question, but beyond that, also comment on this notion of the absorptive capacity of communities and whether we need to re-examine that when it comes to revenue sharing.
Thank you. Community, I'll begin with that. Coming from a coalition that is promoting community engagement in policy and on policies and laws in mining. The Mining Act has attempted to define community, talking about those who are within mining action or a resource as the community that is being considered. And I think even in the CDA that Basic Team has talked about, the same meaning of community has been carried to imply where there is an action, a mining action, those living within and around that particular area. And I know there is a concern that in a mining action, some of the effects, especially the negative effects, could go beyond that particular defined mining community to downstream. For instance, if it is a stream, water could go down several counties beyond the current county of operation. Again, the Mining Act has attempted to provide for a mechanism that whoever feels that they should be considered as a community then can be able to apply to the cabinet secretary to be able to considered as a mining community. So I think the Act has attempted to define who is community in the context of mining. now that the regulations are out and the implementation is going to be beginning in earnest, we will be able to see how that then that comes out. And on the community's absorption capacity, first of all, I think the CDA that has been mentioned severally in this panel is a fantastic opportunity. I personally think it is good because we have come from a journey where companies, mining companies, will decide what they want to do and what development projects they want to engage in without consulting communities. Well, they will consult in one way or another. But the CDA, the Community Development Agreement, has defined the whole process and made it mandatory that companies that are coming in to do mining will need to engage with the communities that have been defined to be able to define their priorities and work with them, and also look at the development priorities within a particular area, so that then they are implementing specific activities that are in line with the development agenda of that particular and the needs of the communities. We have seen some of the companies coming in and beginning tournaments as community investment. You're talking about tournaments in an area where there is no water, the felt need for the community could be water, could be schools and all. And again, in the Community Development Agreement, I think it is good that that in the Community Development Agreement, it is good that there is a distinction between the role of the government and the role of the mining companies. Many times at the community level, you find that the role of public service delivery is shifted to the companies as opposed to government. And I think it is important to say that in as much as companies are coming in and the extractives are coming in, the role of government remains in delivering services, so that then it is not an expectation that schools have to be done by companies. Health facilities have to be provided by companies. That's not the job of the companies. That's the job of the government, and I think that's what CDA attempts to do.
Okay, thank you.
When you're talking about natural resources such as oil and gas, mining and whatnot, and coming from Nigeria, there's a big issue of pollution in those areas. So again, when you talk about compensation, you have to put in perspective what are the damages that are being done in those environments, and why is it important that those people are considered and given certain benefits, if you like. So this is why I think it's different from issues of water and whatnot.
What's your thought on the 70-20, 70-25-5 or 80-15-5? What do we feel from a civil society perspective? Short change, or it doesn't really matter?
I want to go back to my initial comment around the governance failure of it, and saying that the benefit sharing discussion has to go around how do we deliver services for people. All these are mechanisms. When you talk about sharing the profits, it's again a mechanism of how do you ensure that people actually not only benefit but actually access basic services. And there's different ways. I mean, there's talk of the communities getting equity in these companies. All these are just sort of almost policy options on how to get it done. On the recent discussion of whether it's 20 or 80, I think we have been very clear. We did a report on the potential revenues from the Turkana project, for example. And from there we said, these are the level, this is what the community would be getting, this is what the county would be getting, this is what national government would be getting. And those were sort of, very huge. I mean, they weren't huge, but what we were saying in that report was that we need to get consensus very early before even these revenues come, so that you're not actually fighting about revenues that are here, because it's a very different thing. Now it's just very hypothetical. Even in this recent argument around reducing county to 15 and community to 5, these are still hypothetical, because it's still percentages. 5% of what, right? If the resources increase to 10 billion barrels of oil, then that 5% to 10% is huge. If you're talking about producing 300,000 barrels of oil a day, that's a huge amount. And so for me, what's critical is just sort of getting that understanding around how do you ensure that services are delivered. And I want to talk about this absorptive capacity. I mean, we've discussed this a lot, and we are looking at it, for example, even from the national government point of view. Not too long ago, our national budget were, around 200, 300 billion shillings. Now we've almost hit 1.7 trillion, or almost hitting 2 trillion by the next and going to the next budget. How did national government manage to keep spending this, right? And still, at the end of the year, we always hear that ministries are taking money back. So why don't you start capping those ministries as well and say, actually, if you didn't spend this, then the next one will reduce actually by this amount. Since you can't spend, maybe you should even cut a bit more since you can't spend that amount, right? So there's this, and it's not intentional by national government, but national government tends to have this really, the big parent approach. But then I'd like to also challenge the sort of academia, going back to those percentages, that academia are the ones who need to start. We need to start thinking a bit more about how these resources, how the benefits of these resources will go. I know some thinking has gone around dividing between the impacts and sort of actual benefits. Because what is an actual benefit, right? If you lose your whole livelihood but you get 5%, does it really bring you back to where you are, or are you actually benefiting? Yeah, or are you even in the negative, where now you've lost all your cattle, now you've become a guard for tallow, So which one is the real wealth that you're actually getting? Are you actually benefiting from this, or have you actually lost? And so I want to really challenge academia in that sense. Now we need to start really thinking these things before we get to production, especially for the oil. I think we're too late for the titanium, but for the oil, at least we have time to think.
Academia is always a fourth stakeholder incognito somewhere in the room. So thank you for those thoughts or comments. Dr. Adano, National Treasury, I wish I could give you a chair right here to be a panelist to respond to some of those issues that are coming up. Majala, you've got quite a few questions. I'll start with, I'll go to you.
Thank you for all the questions. I'll start off with the controversial one about Miraa and tea and having the benefits spread out in the benefit sharing ratio versus what is happening at the moment. I think this is more of a conversation that I would want to have over lunch versus on record. But I would say that specifically because some of these resources are renewable, then that benefit should be shared a lot more widely than is currently happening versus the non-renewable ones that have to go straight to national government. If I had my way as now county government, I would say that the benefits should be 70% county government, 20% community, because county government at the end of the day will still be community, and 10 to national government. That is of course extremely controversial, it would never happen, but these are the type of conversations that we must have about what is being invested in the different sectors, renewable and non-renewable, versus also the benefits that would be accruing from them. On the issue of royalties and the mechanisms for absorbing them from national government, have we asked the question? Yes, and yes, and yes, multiple times. The conversation isn't solely about Ministry of Mining, it is with National Treasury, and I believe the Cabinet Secretary, Dan Kazungu, has initiated conversations with the CS Rotich to see how those mechanisms will be implemented and how county governments can start accessing those royalty funds. From a county government perspective, particularly Taita Taveta, we don't have a large-scale project that is currently contributing massively to the royalty pot. What we do have is multiple gemstone and construction or commercial mineral operations that some are paying royalties. So if you go into the KBS, the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics figures, you'll find that there's contributions of gemstones to the royalty pot. However, we feel that at the moment, as it stands, National Government Ministry of Mining does not necessarily have the capacity to collect. Therefore, we as county government would want to get into a conversation about how do we facilitate collection so that we know what is due to us from the 2010, and where possible, capture that 20% and 10% before it gets into the national pot. That again is treasury conversation. Obviously, all the money has to go into the consolidated fund first, but because we know how extrapolated the process can be, we'd obviously want to have the money within ourselves first. And on that same note, you asked about the taxation of ballast and sand. From a constitutional perspective, counties can only tax certain items, particularly devolved services. Minerals should not be taxed. What is currently happening in counties is cess is charged, not a tax. Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, so help me out in the definitions of the difference between cess and tax, but I know that we've found a legal way of being able to charge cess and not the tax. Now, that wouldn't necessarily be considered a benefit because it's an amount on the volumes of minerals being exported from one place to another. And that goes straight into our local revenue funds that would then get distributed to the services that need to be provided. From another mineral perspective, the gemstones, for example, there has to be a conversation about how are these minerals, how is the tax or royalties collected from these minerals based on the fact that some of these minerals are very difficult to regulate. 1 gram of, let's even say 10 grams of a savarite stone could very easily cost $10 million. I'm exaggerating figures, but it could very easily cost that. Now, if that same 10-gram savarite stone can fit into someone's sock or bra, how are you going to charge them? And then how will national government and county government get those benefits to be able to distribute to the communities? I think those were my questions.
All right, that's fine. I'll give the mic to Korir so he can respond because national government keeps cropping up and Adano has volunteered not to come on stage.
Thank you very much. Again, back to the issue of royalties and the percentages. I think we need to agree that benefit sharing is a much broader concept than just the fiscal issues. And like we've said, it includes a lot of local content issues. We also need to agree that constitutionally speaking, minerals are vested in the national government, okay? So that's the Katiba. It's part of public land that is vested in the national government. And that is why what counties and communities can get is a benefit, but the primary responsibility, constitutionally speaking, inheres, in the national government. But in acknowledgement of the need for equitable sharing, in acknowledgement of the reality that communities get disproportionately impacted by the extraction of natural resources, that is why there has to be a benefit sharing mechanism. And so there is never going to be a question about a county getting 70% of a specific natural resource. I think it is not going to be possible unless, of course, we go ahead and amend the Katiba. It must also be appreciated that exploitation of natural resources, especially in a large scale, is a very costly venture. It requires national government to set an enabling environment. It requires often that national government guarantees, makes certain financial commitments ex ante. And naturally that means that national government will need to be able to recoup certain things. I mean, if we talk about the development in Turkana right now, you can imagine the investments around roads. For example, I mean, the construction or the tarmacking of that road from Kitale all the way to Lodwar and into the oil, the oil area is a huge financial outlay that is borne solely by national government, okay? And so I think sometimes the failure to appreciate the big picture that in fact extractive resources will only be realized and revenues will only be realized because national government makes an investment. I mean, we lose that often in this conversation. And I think it's really important. And so coming back again to the propositions on the petroleum bill, I think, like I mentioned, the president in his memorandum proposed that the revenue share, the royalty sharing percentile should be in the region of, 80, 15, 5. That's in the memorandum, actually. And the main argument there is around absorptive capacity of counties and communities. And I think we can argue that perhaps there might be need to develop capacities of counties and even communities to be able to even absorb those resources first. And so there might be need in the bill that's now going back to Parliament, for us to think around what can we do around absorptive capacity, of counties and communities. But, my colleague here mentioned that there are problems, absorptive capacities within national government as well, and it's true. But the reality is that resources are constantly being reallocated, and I think my colleague from National Treasury would be able to say it better. Resources are constantly being reallocated from one ministry and one agency to the other, depending on absorptive capacity, by the way. There is no way this year you can return money, you've not been able to expend money, and then imagine that you will get the same amount of money in the next budgetary cycle. In fact, you will be penalized for that, because it's a cost. You've been sitting on money, the money has not been invested to the benefit of Wananchi, and yet you're being given back that money. That's not going to happen. So there are constant reallocation mechanisms, within national government based on absorptive capacity. Lastly, I think the question of CSR and whether we have a CSR bill, I don't think we do. All I think I mentioned was that in the Mining Act now, what the minister does in stipulating the conditions in the mining agreement is to require that the mining, the mineral rights holder formulates a CDA that is about community development. So really it has effectively institutionalized CSR. That's really sort of the kind of argument that I was making. But we do not have, as it were, a standalone piece of legislation that says, it governs, the entire arena of CSR. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, you want to respond? Yes, please. In fact, let me give you my microphone.
This is moot debating, right? So my fellow panelist here has raised something very interesting and I think important for this particular debate. Minerals are vested in the national government, yes, per the Constitution, Section 62 and 66 of that, defining what public land is and minerals being part of that. And then secondly, talking about the significant investment that is required by national government to create the enabling environment for the investor to come in and carry out the extraction activities. Now I'll take this to gemstone mining, my favorite topic. Gemstone mining is generally done by the communities in far-flung areas by artisanal and small-scale operations. In these particular areas, county government provides these services or has the mandate to provide these services. The roads into these mining areas, to provide water, which is devolved, to provide dispensaries, which are devolved to county government, to provide some form of security in form of fencing or just generally working with county, the security team from the national government on the ground. Now, if county government is required to provide the enabling environment for these particular mining activities, I think then it falls that the benefits from these mining activities should be greatly shared by county government. And in this particular instance, if the Constitution allows for certain delegation of functions to county governments in collaboration with national government, and if we say that certain sectors or certain categories of minerals can be managed by county government, then I think we have an argument to say that, for example, gemstone royalties should be 70% county, 20% community, and 10% national government, because at the end of the day, we're the ones providing the enabling environment and services to the community.
I like both of your argument because in the case of base titanium, we built the enabling infrastructure. We built the dam, we built the power line, we built the road. Well, no, it wasn't in the contract. It wasn't in the contract. But the point being that you're talking about government recuperating when it's building the enabling infrastructure. You're talking about the county government recouping when it's building the infrastructure. And I'm saying we've built, these are all public assets. Okay, the dam is used exclusively by us, but it will be an asset for the community in the county when we leave. But we built a public road, we built a power line, which we handed back to KPLC, and we buy all our power off the grid. And there was no consideration for the investor recuperating his costs apart from the depreciation of the assets through the taxes. But also on absorption, I mean...
That's interesting. So now everyone is claiming they need to be the lead 70% earners.
I was being a bit facetious.
You know, that's very good.
I was just continuing the argument down the train.
Yes, please.
On absorption, we're talking about the ability of counties and communities to spend. And I know I used to work for the Australian government, and I knew you would get a month out from the financial year, and you just start putting in your stationery orders because you didn't want to hand money back at the end of the year because it would impact your budget the following year. So you just end up buying ridiculous amounts of stationery and all this sort of stuff. But why can't we single out this royalty sharing funds as funds for the county and anything unspent? Like, why can't the county set up a natural resource fund where anything that isn't spent on programs for that year goes into an investment fund of something like a national wealth fund, sovereign fund, and it rolls over, creating interest or other investments, so they can actually, and that will make it sustainable. That will make that fund live beyond, say, a base titanium mine life of 11, 13 years.
I think that's a very interesting idea. May I also say that the Extractives Baraza has got no problem with absorptive capacity. We are more than happy to receive a few of those funds to continue our programs. Purity, kindly, your thoughts on anything that has been shared so far, as well as responding to some of the questions that have been raised.
I think a lot has already been responded to, but I'd like just to say that even as we talk about the benefit sharing, the mechanisms and all the debate that is happening, it is important that we take time to consider community preparedness on all these opportunities that are coming. And I like what my colleague is saying, that it is beyond just the numbers on the royalties. It is also in terms of the business opportunities that the sector provides, that then communities need to be able to see how they can be able to plug in. When you see a road, when you see a power line, it is not just a power line to base titanium. It could provide opportunities for other smaller economies to be able to capitalize on it. So that then the debate is not so much, it is important, absolutely important on the royalties, 70, 20, 10, absolutely important, but there is much more. When you talk about the local content, which is still an element of benefit sharing, how are communities prepared in terms of skills, in terms of knowledge on the opportunities, and even how does that link with the county governments as well? We talk about employable skills as part of the benefit sharing. What is the county government doing in terms of the preparedness of the TVETs to be able to provide those skills for those mining actions that we anticipate as a way of benefit sharing? So then we're looking at it more broadly and not just getting stuck on the 70, 20, 10, which is important, and we need to see how those mechanisms will pan out, but there's much more. Because base titanium is here for 12, 13 years, like he rightly put. It goes. What happens? You know? So then what local economies have been spurred as a result of the action by base titanium that can be able to live beyond? And then lastly, my last comment on this, it's very easy to, again, think about the benefits and how much investment you're going to put into getting the benefits coming down at all levels. And we forget that sometimes the amount of investment on the benefit sharing vis-a-vis the cost, especially the negative costs to communities, may not be the same. How important is it if I can create 1,000 jobs and provide for the community, but downstream I am messing up 10,000 households because they cannot drink the water downstream? All right? So will I sing and say, there is benefit sharing because we have the local content, we are sharing the 70, 20, 10, but downstream, somebody's livelihood is completely destroyed. We must balance that discussion It is not just about the numbers, it is also about livelihoods that also needs to be discussed about. Thank you.
A chance for 2 more burning questions because we are short of time. It needs to Kenya Oil and Gas platform. Your last thoughts, comments, responding to the questions, please, if you can keep it brief, that would be great.
Yeah. First, just say thanks again for having me here. And then, in conclusion, what I just like to say that we need to get a broad-based consensus amongst ourselves in terms of what benefit sharing is, and this is something for Dr. Singwe as well to think about. I think the first solution is a political solution, that we need to get that broad-based consensus. And then we can bring our good friends at the economists on board in terms of how do we work that solution that has been proposed, whatever percentages and that kind of thing. And then the other thing is around the Kenyan question of what should each and every Kenyan have access to as a basic right. And like I said, one of the reasons we push for an increased share is because of the need there as well. You can argue absorptive capacity, but there's also the gap between the northern frontier and where we are now is huge. The level of investment, we'll probably run out of our resources before we actually bridge that gap. And so for us, it's important to also start thinking about what are the basic rights that every Kenyan needs to access. Moving on. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Purity from Haki Madini.
My conclusion, we are in a very good dispensation, I think, as a country, especially in the mining sector. We've come a long way, in having the sector getting organized by the laws and the policies that are coming into place. I'd urge all of us, this is an opportunity we have to make things right and to start right. The regulations are coming up every day. I think there are some still being discussed right now. We have an opportunity to make our input and also to have the commitment to actually roll over, in terms of institutions that we're going to establish that have been provided for by the law and the regulations that are coming up. And we will need to learn certain things, especially being able to objectively discuss. We have different interests, even as we sit here, to be able to look at the country and what is best for our country. There are lots of experiences and cases out there that have worked. We don't need to re-engineer the wheel. We can be able to learn. Lots of teams have gone outside there for benchmarking. We need those lessons to be able to implement right now. We need the political goodwill to do the correct thing. We need to unlearn certain things in the sector. When we were in a different dispensation, there's a way we knew how to go about things. But now with the law and the opportunity it has given us, we need to unlearn certain things and learn new things. And one of the new things is to respect the different interests, including community interests, and be able to navigate that space and do the correct thing.
Thank you so much, Purity, for that. We need to unlearn. That's the first time I've ever heard that being spoken in a panel in Extractives, and I think you're spot on. Simon from Bay Titanium.
Look, thanks very much for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation. A few take-homes for me are we all agree benefit sharing needs to take place, but we just need to iron out, one, the mechanisms, how to find it, and then we actually need to do it. I think, like Mohammed said, we really want the Ministry of Mining and Treasury to start giving money to the community, to the county. It will make our lives a hell of a lot easier. So please, if you can cut a cheque tomorrow, that'd be great. I also just want to add, it's a question for another day, but have we put the horse before the cart here? Do we have an extractive industry in Kenya to be talking about benefits? You can argue we don't. So have we, like I said, this is a conversation for another day, but are we creating an environment where it is easy to invest here? Okay, and we've got a fantastic opportunity with a country to our border who has blown up its mining industry through government actions, and Kenya has a great opportunity to really attract some solid investment. Are we doing that? You can make a very strong argument that we're not. And likewise with, I think Charles said it, we're talking about benefits. There are no benefits yet because the oil hasn't started pumping. We're not selling anything. So that's why we think about this sort of stuff. Let's not create too great a burden that is going to prohibit investment and stop people to say, hang on a second, that's too hard.
Thank you, and I'm glad you're sitting next to Dr. Korir on that very point.
Yeah, thank you. I was listening very keenly. I am persuaded that our mining laws and policies and practices are extremely investor friendly. I should hope very much that you're confident as a mining rights holder that your rights will not be expropriated as has happened in other places, that they would not be nationalized because that investment is colossal. You know, I believe as well that the regulatory regime is quite reasonable and that that built within it is sufficient mechanisms and safeguards to ensure that there's a meeting of the minds as between the investor and the Kenyan state. But other issues have also come up, which I think are very important. I think we are having this conversation because we are Kenyans. Kenyans engage in public dialogue over issues that are important, and often, I think, whenever something like news about an oil find hits the public, definitely huge expectations are created. So part of the reason we're having these conversations also is to manage those expectations, to make people really understand that perhaps it's going to take a long time, and even when it does, we'll still have to make sure that the investor recoups. For example, in relation to oil, that the only part of oil that we are entitled to is profit oil, because cost oil still goes to the oil company, etc., etc. I think there's been some bit of benchmarking that has taken place to several countries. I know the county government of Turkana has sent representatives to a number of countries with support, I'm sure, of development partners. I believe that the lessons they have learned are important, but I believe that there is still a lot more to learn, really, because Kenya has not been traditionally an extractive country. And so we've got a very steep learning curve. And we're grateful that, the lessons that we're learning from, the work that Base Titanium is doing, are already beginning to help us, understand, extractives a little better than we would have understood if we were just dealing with it in the abstract. So yes, I believe there would still be need for a number of us to go out there. I know there's a huge investment on the part of Talo, for example, in terms of building capacity of our engineers, our technicians, guys who are working in the oil and gas sector. So there's a lot of investment in training on the part of Talo, for example, and that investment, has gone out already. It's been several years of work, and that is long before we reach production. And again, that attests to, I believe, an investor who is very confident about where we are, as a country. There might have been a few other issues that were raised, but I can't.
No worries.
Thank you very much. Well, the last one is just in relation to the Deputy Governor of Taita Taveta. She raises a very important issue around the investment by counties, especially around artisanal mining. I honestly think we need to have a conversation on that because my conversation was mainly, it mainly related to large-scale mining. I'm a believer sort of in real empowerment of counties to do certain things, real empowerment of communities to do other things. And so I want to believe that we can actually have that conversation because there is scope within the Mining Act for that, especially in terms of, the power given to the minister to categorize, to create categories of minerals, and categories of royalties, from one mineral to the other. So I believe there might be opportunity there for us to actually have that conversation with counties. And lastly, in terms of investing revenue windfall, that's why I think national government is very much focused on these sovereign wealth fund bill. The need to make sure that the resources we get by way of extractive windfalls are not just absorbed by the present they don't just benefit the present, but they can be invested long term and ensure that our infrastructure would be able to be better going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Karuri. Honorable Majala, your remaining thoughts.
My final remarks at the moment are to do with the capacity building of our communities as well as people wanting to engage in the extractive sector. Taita Taveta hosts the Mining Institute as established by the Mining Act 2016. It is currently being constructed at Taita Taveta University, which received a charter in 2017, and we're extremely proud of that. So if anyone is looking at increasing the capacity for mineral-related skills, please come over to the Mining Institute, and that is a baby of the ministry.
I have to give a bit of a disclaimer or an apology. I was meant to be one of the authors on the artisanal mining chapter in whether that's voucher sales, but I launched my political career just before I was meant to start writing. So apologies for that. Life has interesting turns, but I'm still fully engaged within the mining sector. One of my roles within the county government is the executive committee member of mining. So there are things that I can still